While I was in Australia, I wanted to find out what it was like to be attacked by a shark. I didn't want to experience it myself, I had my limits, so instead I met up with Brett Canellan, who was born on the, well, I'll just let him tell the story.
I had never, when I was younger, had any encounters with sharks. I hadn't seen any. I think it had gotten to the point where you're not complacent, but you start to look at the fact that you've been surfing for 10 plus years, you've never seen a shark, you've never had any friends who've seen one or had an encounter, and you start to think those odds there's a lot of other things you should be worried about. Best way I've used to describe it is I played a lot of sports when I was younger, played rugby. I was a small kid and I used to just get trucked by the bigger kids that would always tackle me. It felt like I was back on the footy field and just got hit so hard and got thrown off my board. I landed in the water, and before I could even look around and figure out what had happened, I looked down and this shark, which has hit me from the right side, has swum around to the other side of me and had bitten me on my left leg. In an instant, like the time in between when it hit me and it swam around was so quick. And that moment where I realized what was happening was one of the most surreal moments I've ever experienced, because there was this certain feeling of enormity of knowing what was happening. Like you can't really rationalize what is going on in front of you. You just know that it feels like in that moment everything else in the world doesn't matter, everything stands still. It's just you and what is happening in front of you. And for me, it's that moment, I guess, where time really slows down almost to the point of stopping.
During those slow-mo Matrix bullet time moments, he remembers 3 distinct things. They're things he still dreams about 8 years later.
The first one is to feel the shark's skin. So as it bit me, the first thing I try and do is put my hands on it. And I realized that its skin is really rough. If you're into sharks, you know that. If not, it probably comes as a bit of a surprise. The second thing that stood out to me was just the complete absence of sound. And it wasn't like there was any water splashing. It's not like the shark was making any noise. I was screaming in that moment, like screaming for help based on what Joel had told me later on. But for me, it's just complete silence. And then the third thing I can remember is just the look specifically of the shark's eye. So I'm looking down at this thing and I kind of just lock eyes with, it doesn't really have the characteristic of an eye, it's just black. There's just this black dot which is staring at you. And the thing that I took away from that moment, and it wasn't necessarily like I was processing it in this much depth in the moment, but as I look back on what this memory felt like, as I'm looking at the shark, there's no emotion in that. When you're looking at a shark, this is a creature that's been designed over millions of years to survive, to find things to eat and kill. Like, I'm unfortunate that I was the thing that it was eating and trying to use to survive in that moment. But I think there's a feeling of almost hopelessness that you have because you can't argue with the shark. You can't tell it to stop. You can't reason with it. You're just so insignificant in that moment when compared to how well designed this creature is.